Thank you very much. I got the start sign, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. I really do appreciate you giving an hour of your time during a very interesting conference to this session. I hope that you find it useful and interesting. Developing interactional skills, that's the focus today, but I'm going to go very broad as well, link it to the conference theme. So hopefully you'll be able to move your thinking forward, not just about interaction and what it is and how to teach it, but also about the broader issues that we're discussing at this conference, which is about learner agency and teacher efficacy. Okay, my name is Evelina Galaczi. I work at Cambridge Assessment. I live in Cambridge, England, and I'm here wearing several hats actually. One of them is IELTS. IELTS is on the name of all your beautiful red bags. That's one of the exams that I work on in Cambridge. I also work on a lot of the Cambridge exams, so Cambridge English First, Cambridge English Advanced, and so on. And I work on the teacher qualifications, so the CELTA, the Delta. So I've got quite a broad portfolio of exams that I'm involved in. Even though I work at an exam board, I'm not just going to be talking about examinations, because I really believe, and that's what we believe at IELTS and at Cambridge, that it is not just about assessment. It's assessment and learning working together. That's what really matters. So I'll be tapping both into the learning and to the assessment context. But before we start, I've got this picture for you, and I've got these juggling balls actually. So this is a workshop on interactive workshop on presentation, but let's park that for a minute. Can anyone juggle in this room? Can you demonstrate? Never volunteer for anything. Never say, try. Just give it a try. Okay? Yeah. Oh, wow. Amazing. You're very, very, very good. I wanted to learn to juggle, but I had one day, and I didn't quite manage it. But the reason I brought this because interaction is actually like juggling. Your mind is doing, when engaging interaction, what your hands are doing on a much, much higher level. So interaction really is like juggling. Think of it that way. Doing several things, multitasking, doing several things at the same time. But it's even harder than that. Interaction is like juggling with one hand. So our fantastic, brilliant juggler, do you think you can demonstrate with one hand?
Maybe.
Give it a go.
I can't do 3 in one hand though.
Can you do 3 with one hand?
No, I can do 2.
Do 2. That's great, so you're amazing. But it's very, very difficult to do 3 with one hand. So that's what interaction is like, juggling with one hand, an incredibly difficult skill to do. Before I start going into the details of interaction and what it is and how to develop it, here's really the most important question. Why should we even think about it? Why should we give it time to research it, to teach it, or to talk about it at a conference? And I've given you 3 pictures here which will represent metaphors as we go through this talk. The first one is the map. That's on the left. So this really represents socio-political developments happening around the world, and they are about mobility and about English being a lingua franca. Now, it doesn't mean English is the best language out there at all, but it just means that currently English has the role of being a global language, which means that as the world becomes more global, as companies become globalized, the workplace becomes global, the learning, universities become internationalized, you need a common language. And that language has become English, in fact. So here's just one statistic. There are many, many for you. The top 1,000 universities in the world teach 70,000 programs in English. Now that's a massive number of programs where you need to speak English in order to be part of those programs in the 1,000 top universities in the world. Picking our second metaphor, the brain. Now interaction, a reason why interaction is important for us to talk about, not just sociopolitically, but also from a language acquisition point of view. And this is what Rod Ellis, who is one of the biggest authorities in second language acquisition, says, that interaction is the matrix in which language acquisition takes place. Not reading is the matrix, listening or writing, but interaction is that matrix. In other words, that's the foundation, not just of developing speaking skills. It's the foundation for developing language, because it's through interaction that you can consolidate knowledge and develop new knowledge. So it's a fundamental skill from a language acquisition point of view. Third metaphor, the tree. And this is really about growth. It's about 21st century skills, and a few speakers have mentioned this already at the conference. It's about the skills that you need to be successful in this new age. And it's not reading and writing, it's not arithmetic and so on, but it's additional skills, which is, in this case, effective communication. You need to be able to communicate effectively in order to be successful in the 21st century. So this is really the question why we should be thinking about interaction, but let's just include a story in here. Who is this girl? That's me. That's me at the age of 7. I was born in Bulgaria, in Eastern Europe. Has anyone been to Bulgaria? I just met someone, and so a few people. And I started learning English when I was 7 years old. My mom made me go. After school, I didn't want to go. I hated it. I wanted to play with my friends, but I had to go to English class twice a week. This is one of the textbooks I use. This is the actual book. It's missing the back cover. It has my writing in it. But this is one of the books I used. It's not a very communicative book. It has lists of words. There was a lot of spelling. There were a lot of drills. There were a lot of just stimulus response type of activities. Remember, Donna was talking about audio stimulus response? Well, this is what this book is based on. So that's how I was learning English for a few years. And then at the age of 12, my father got a job in London. So we moved from Sofia and from studying English with this book to London and a regular school in London. I couldn't communicate. I couldn't say anything. My spelling skills and my drills and grammar helped me a little bit, but they were not enough. So it was really quite a struggle for me because my teachers hadn't realized that they can't just be teaching me language and expect that by osmosis, somehow, I'm going to develop interactional skills. That just wasn't happening. They hadn't focused on that. So that's kind of where we are with interaction. That's really my own story that brings me very close to that skill. So I've structured my talk in a few chapters. We'll just look at interaction from various different angles. The first one is the brain, is the cognitive aspect of interaction. Remember the juggling, how incredibly difficult it is? So let's look at what happens actually in the brain when we have to engage in interaction. And to do that, I want you to think about, this is a little task for you. I've got a question for you. Is this task a speaking task? I'm going to show you 4 examples, and you just talk to your partner and decide, is this task a speaking task? So this is the first one. This is a reading aloud task. So in this case, it has 6 sentences. It can be a passage. It can be anything. And you have to read it aloud. So talk to your partner for 30 seconds. Is this a speaking task? Okay, this was very quick. What do you think? What is the consensus? Okay, I'm hearing, thank you. I'm hearing a no. Why? Yeah?
In my understanding, it may be wrong, but the tasks have to be like focused on the meaningful, the communicative purposes, but just reading something aloud doesn't mean it's just a task. Even though it's more challenging, but the purpose of reading aloud is not for the communicative. Okay,
so it doesn't have a communicative angle. All right, other thoughts about this task?
I think this kind of task is used in modern speaking tests, like the songs and maybe Pearson, as a speaking task. So.
It is. So it's used as a speaking task, but you tell me what you think.
There's no juggling.
There's no juggling. Why not?
You're just passively reading.
Or you're just kind of doing this, you're just touching the balls. Yes. Okay, I agree with you. This is not a speaking task. Even though speaking comes out of your mouth, you're producing speech, but it's not. And that's because you're not generating language. It's given to you, you're just reproducing language. Okay, let's take a look at another.
Just reproducing, and that's bad? It's not good?
I'm not saying it's good or bad. We're just thinking, is it a speaking task? And actually, it's a very good question. There is no such thing as a bad task or a good task, or a bad test or a good test. There's a bad test for a purpose and a good test for a purpose. So it depends what you're using it for. Reading aloud is a fantastic actually activity for learners if they want to work on pronunciation, story reading. I think it's great. But if you want to develop speaking skills, then it's not good for speaking as a speaking task. Yeah, thank you. That's a very, very good question. Okay, here's another task. This is a telling a story task. So you've got pictures, and you have to tell the story in the pictures. Is this a speaking task?
Yeah.
Yeah? What makes this a speaking task and not the previous one? Okay, can I go over there?
You have content.
You have content, but the content is given to you.
So you describe.
Okay. Okay, so you have to generate the, yes, you have to generate the lexical items yourself because it's just a picture, okay? Any other thoughts? Why is this a speaking task? So you have to generate the vocabulary, what else?
You have to create vocabulary.
Vocabulary, grammar, all of this has to come from you. Okay, I agree, this is a speaking task. Here's the third one. Is this a speaking task? So this is a task, again, all of these are exam tasks, by the way, that I've taken. But they're very good as learning tasks as well. So this is a two-way discussion, examiner and test taker. It can be a teacher and a student, it doesn't matter. You have a topic, and you have to talk about it. So you're discussing a topic with an examiner or teacher. Is this a speaking task? Yes, what makes this one different from the previous one? I'm sorry?
Individual content that you...
So the content is not given to you necessarily. That's right. Before the story was there, here you have to generate the ideas yourself. All right? And you have to generate the vocabulary, the grammar that goes with it. You have to put that together. All of that is part of this task. So yes, it's a speaking task. Now, and here's my last task. This is discussing, but not an examiner and a test taker. This is discussing with another test taker or discussing with another student. You have a topic, and then you have to talk about these things. So you've got a bit of scaffolding. Is this a speaking task? Obviously it is. Okay, so we said that the storytelling is a speaking task, and the discussion is a speaking task. What is the fundamental difference?
You're creating, you're responding to what they say. So what comes out of your mouth wouldn't have come out of your mouth if it wasn't for something that came out of their mouth.
Yes. That's a really good way of putting it. So you're responding, in the discussion, you're responding to another partner who is in this conversation with you. So it's about this, actually. In the first task, you were just reproducing language. In the second one, it was just a monologue. You were speaking, but you are not reacting to what another person has said. And in the third one, you're engaging in interaction. So that's what interaction is. You need at least two human beings, and you have that exchange of back and forth. It's like a tennis game. It's like a ping pong game. So let's think about what goes on in the brain when we have to engage in interaction. Now here's speaking, because interaction involves speaking, right? So first you have to generate an idea. Now this is non-linguistic form. You're just coming up with some idea. There are no words or grammar associated with it. It's just very abstract. Then the next thing you do, you start putting that idea, giving that idea some syntactic, syntactic lexico-linguistic forms. So you're trying to, you're bringing up from all your vocabulary banks and your knowledge of grammar, you're bringing that into putting those ideas into syntactic formations. Then you give it phonetic form. Then you decide what that is going to sound like. All of that is in the brain. Then you send a message to the articulators, that's the bits in your mouth and the lips, to pronounce that. And as you're doing that, you're monitoring the entire time. Because if something comes out a bit wrong, you correct yourself. So this is what speaking is broadly, basically speaking, in a nutshell. It's not an easy process. This is what listening is, because interaction, you're responding to someone, so you have to be listening as well. This is what interaction is. So speaking was top to bottom in a way. Listening is kind of bottom to top. You're hearing a speech signal, and you have to start decoding it. Because you're hearing a string of just sounds. So you have to even figure out, where do the breaks come? Where are the words? Where are the chunks? Where are the sentences? When you read, how is hearing a speech signal different from seeing a sentence? You've got the bits between the words marked because there's a white space there. In speaking, it's just you're hearing a whole stream of words. You have to start decoding what that is, whether you've got words or chunks or where they're ending. And once you start getting an idea of what you are hearing, then you start matching it to some lexical knowledge that you have. And then you start putting some syntactic structure on what you've heard. So you're putting a syntactic frame on top of it to start making even more sense. And then you understand what the proposition is, what the idea is. So again, a very complicated process from bottom to top. Interaction is both of these things happening at the same time. So interaction is not actually speaking, it's speaking and listening. It's a different kind of skill. And in fact, in the Common European Framework of Reference, are you familiar with the CEFR? That's given as a separate skill. There are 5 skills in the CFR. Interaction is the 5th one, because it's a different kind of skill. You've got all the speaking processes, cognitive, going on in the brain, all the listening happening at the same time. You're also bringing into your performance your external knowledge of the world, of the topic, of the speaker, of the person you're talking to, of the speech act. So your brain is not just juggling 3 balls with one hand, it's also thinking of all these other things going on around you as you're constructing your sentence. And breathing has to come into this as well, because you can't start speaking when you've just emptied your lungs. So you have to be timing your breathing, and as your brain is juggling, you're also timing when you've taken a breath and you can go. So it's incredibly complicated. You're decoding and encoding at the same time. I've gone very quickly through cognitive processes of interaction. This is really just to illustrate what an incredibly complicated skill it is, and how incredibly difficult it is to acquire it unless you get a lot of practice and a lot of scaffolding. It doesn't just develop. When I went to London at age 12, I had studied English for 5 years. I couldn't speak because this hadn't been part of my world. If you just want to read a little bit more, I've just given you 2 citations. We talked about call-outs earlier today. My call-outs are basically the people I'm citing. So the scholars who have moved my thinking, the research, these are 2 of them. So this is actually John Field, but in 2 publications, he's a very, very good psycholinguist who talks about cognitive processes of speaking and listening. If you want to find out more, these are 2 good examples, 2 good books. Okay. So we talked about a little bit about what goes on in the brain with interaction. Let's look at what the elements of interactional competence are. So what are the skills that you need the micro skills that interactional competence consists of? Sorry, you can't see up there. The first one is to initiate new ideas. It's actually quite basic when you break it down. You initiate new ideas and you respond to ideas. That's the table tennis match. You're initiating and responding. Those are the 2 main moves in interaction. You also develop your own ideas. So if you introduce an idea, you say something more about it, and you respond to your partner's ideas. When they say something, you have to extend it a little bit. You don't just move on to your own idea. You have to be engaging with your partner's idea. You also invite and support. If you're talking too much, you're just doing a monologue. That's not interaction. You need to be inviting other people to join you, to tell you what they think. And support means that if you see them struggling, if they're looking for a word, if they can't really express their thought, you come in and you help them. You have to listen actively throughout this whole process. You can't just sit passively and not show that you're listening. You have to be showing actively your conversational partner that you are listening to them. And you have to also use your body language in a way that shows them you're following them. So that means your posture is important. Are you sitting towards them or away from them? So when I have an interaction with my husband and I'm angry with him, guess what? I sit like that and he's over there. You have to be looking at the person you're talking to. It's important. So these are really, these 7 skills are the micro skills of interaction. It's not complicated to break them down. What is complicated to put them into practice. But I think awareness of those micro skills is very important for when you're teaching interactional competence. Okay, I just want to show you what this looks like in the learner conversation. So I've chosen a video of these lovely 2 learners. They're called Rino and Gabriella. They're from Switzerland. And they're discussing, it's actually a task from an exam, from one of the Cambridge exams, but it's very much a task that you would find in a learning classroom as well. So just want to show you, I want to play you about 1.5 minutes of what they're doing. So let's just have a listen.
Here are some pictures of things that can make living in a city enjoyable. First, talk to each other about how these things can help people to enjoy life in a city. Then decide which 2 things you think are the most important. All right?
Well, I think that a park is essential. You know, maybe on summer days when you're getting bored, stay at home, hot, and you just go to a park, enjoy yourself with family and friends. What do you think about this, Ray?
Yeah, also the big cities has a lot of parks. They are very nice, and you see there some birds and other people who are walking through the park and relaxing.
Yeah.
And here you can see, I think it's a football stadium. Yeah, it's very big. At the weekends there are a lot of matches there to enjoy it, to watch it, and to support the team.
Yeah, sports are essential.
Yeah.
And there are lots of coffee bar here. This is more for the old people who wants to sit and relax, reading their newspaper and chatting with friends. This is very good too.
Yeah, but there are also young people.
Yeah, there are also young
who are talking to each other.
But they look a little bored here in the picture, don't you think?
They like to prefer to go to a disco.
To a disco, yeah. Disco is very nice too.
To enjoy the whole night, talk with other persons, dancing.
Okay. So, Rina and Gabriel, what level do you think they're at? Beginning, intermediate, advanced? Intermediate, I would agree. So they're 2 intermediate learners discussing a task together, so they're engaging in interaction. I've transcribed the very first part of their interaction. So this is the first about 50 seconds of what they said, okay? So we've got Gabriel is on the right and Rino is here. Take a look at it and tell me which of these interactional micro skills I talked about you can see here. And I've underlined the things they talk about, so park and football. So that's what the underlines are. So take about a minute, just talk to your partner, the person next to you. Which are the skills that we talked about that you see in this transcript?
What C4 level would that conversation?
B2.
That would be B2. Okay, so just
Yeah. And in fact, Rino is a bit higher on the B2. I'd say he's maybe a high B2, and she's very much a B2.
Oh, okay.
Extending. So stadium, shadowing, and then extending ideas.
What do you think about this?
Okay, shall we talk about it together?
Oh, yeah, of course. Question and response. That's an interesting part.
So let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at it as a whole group. All right, tell me, what are some of the micro skills of interaction that you see here? Questions? What do you think about this? So she's inviting him because she knows it cannot just be a monologue. They both have to contribute. Yeah. What else?
The stadium is a clear example of support. You helped him find the words.
Exactly, he was struggling, and she supplied stadium, but not in a dominating way. She saw this was exactly just a moment of trouble in conversation, so she stepped in to help him. What else? What are some other interactional skills here?
Response markers, the year.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
It's called Aizuchi, the response markers. What are they called again?
Do you mean the year?
Yeah.
Okay. In linguistics research, they're called back channels. I don't know if there's another term for them, but back channels, yes.
I would say the comment where she says, yes, sports are essential, because it goes from the topic of parks, and then he changes it to stadium, and then she responds.
Exactly. So it's actually, yes, he started the football stadium topic. He introduced that. He talked about it a bit more, and then she finished it. So she comments on this. This is a very collaborative interaction. It may not seem like it's a...
Would you consider back channeling as interactive?
I would, actually. In this case, back channeling, these are the little words, yeah, yeah. It depends, to be honest, because you can be using this without understanding anything, right? Just as like a verbal thing that you need to be doing. So if that's the only thing your learners can do, you need to teach them, that's not enough. But something like, I agree, exactly, yes, then that really signals comprehension of some kind. So they don't signal necessarily comprehension, but they're definitely essential as a starting point to show that you're following. Yeah. Yeah. This is a very collaborative interaction. It may not look like it's difficult to produce for them. Remember the juggling their brains had to do? It was not an easy thing to do. Other interactions, which I decided not to show because of time, could have been very parallel. You introduce your topic, you talk about it, your partner says, yes, I agree, and then your partner moves on to another topic that they talk about. So it's very just monologues, parallel monologues instead of collaborative interaction. So this is really what is happening here. There are 6 interactional turns. If you go down, you see that there's 6 lines that I've given you. They develop 2 topics. That's quite an achievement. So they're collaborating together to develop those topics. So the topics take several turns to develop, not just one turn that you've introduced. And these are the 2 topics. They initiate and respond. Both of them do that, and they develop their own and their partner's topic. It's very easy to develop your own topic, because then you're just producing language. You're only activating the speaking cognitive processes. But it's much harder to develop your partner's topic, because then you're activating speaking and listening at the same time in real time. Remember, simultaneously, much, much harder to do. So it's important to initiate topics, that's part of interaction, but it's even more important to be responding to your partner's ideas and what they're talking about. That's when you're truly developing interactional skills. And that's how they do it. So one of them introduces park and develops it, but the other one picks it up as well and says something additional about this idea, this topic. Then that person introduces football, another idea, talks about it a little bit more, and Gabriela says something very brief, but it shows she has understood. She adds to it. This is what your learners have to be doing, this constant back and forth. But remember, for the brain, this is incredibly difficult. They need lots of practice to be doing this. And also they're showing active listening and support. So the back channels there, that's an example that I'm really following you, I'm really listening while you're speaking, and that's again part of interaction. So you saw some of these micro skills shown in Rino and Gabriela's language. And it's actually quite impressive to see that they can do this. Again, a shout out to the people that have influenced my thinking in this. 2 actually pieces of work here. The first one is by Nakatsuhara and others. And she's a Japanese scholar who works in the UK, Fumi Nakatsuhara. She's one of my close friends. And she and I did a research study on looking at interactional competence and breaking it down into all the skills, the micro skills I talked about today. We've got a very long, extensive checklist. This is all free, by the way, so you can just go to the Cambridge English website and find this. And then the one on the right is actually something I wrote, but it synthesizes my own thinking about interaction and what it is. Okay, moving on. So we talked about what goes on in the brain when you are interacting. We talked about what it looks like in learning conversation. Let's think about now how you can test interaction. Now, testing is incredibly important because tests have a gatekeeping function. So whatever you put in a test, the teachers will be teaching to that. Tests have incredibly powerful impact. And if you put a reading aloud task in your test, what are you going to be training your students to do? Read aloud clearly, with good pronunciation and good reading fluency. If you have a test which is computer delivered, and so it just gives you prompts to respond to, you'll be training them to be responding to prompts. If you have an interactional test, you'll be developing interaction. So tests, I don't need to tell you this, are very, very powerful in determining what happens in classrooms. So let's take a look at how you can test interaction. Now this is a really, really good way to think about speaking tests. You can think of two different continua, and you can map all the speaking tests in the world against these. So the first continua is, how is the test delivered? Is it delivered by an examiner, by a human being, or by a machine? So it's how it's delivered. And the second axis is, how is it marked? Is it marked by a human being, an examiner, or is it marked by a machine? Those are the two options in speaking assessment, how you deliver it, how you mark it. And if you map these two continua, you get 4 different quadrants. So let's start with quadrant number 1, examiner delivered and examiner marked tests. So these are called face-to-face tests. Can you think of some examples of face-to-face speaking test examples in quadrant 1? IELTS is one of them, absolutely, yes. IELTS is very much in there because it involves 2 human beings, it has interaction. Any other examples? They don't have to be international, you can think of local tests as well. So the tests that you develop for your students, exactly. Brilliant.
So they have to speak with me.
Exactly, yeah. That's it. So that's it. Yes. So IELTS is actually one of my examples, and also the Cambridge English C Advanced, most of the Cambridge speaking tests are also interactional tests. So IELTS is one of those examples, and some of the Cambridge tests. There are others, of course, as well. What about examiner marked? So the examiner still gives, machine delivered, but examiner marked. So it's a computer-based speaking test, but there are human raters TOEFL IBT is in this category. Yeah. Any other exams that you can think of? The APTIS test actually as well. So APTIS is a British Council test and TOEFL is an ETS. Yes, but these are here. So delivered by machine, which means, is it interaction or monologue? It's monologue. Exactly, it's just a series of short and long monologues. What about machine marked and machine delivered? So completely automated. Can you think of any examples? The Pearson test of English academic, yes, that's a fully automated speaking test, yes. And also LinguaSkill, this is actually another exam that Cambridge has produced. So these are fully automated tests. Now, can a computer engage in interaction with another human being? No. So these are obviously tests that do not tap into interaction. What about tests which are delivered by a human being, by examiner, but marked by machine? Can you think of any? There aren't any. And that's because when a human being is involved in interaction, or 2 human beings, what is produced is so rich and complex and unpredictable, the machine cannot possibly handle it. The machine cannot measure it, cannot recognize it. So currently there are no tests in there. So let's think about interaction and the IELTS speaking test. So we said that's an interactional test. This is what the test involves. It's a 3-part speaking test that has 3 different tasks. And that's important. You need variety of tasks. So it has an interview, a long turn, and a discussion. So that you're engaging in interaction with the examiner, with another person, in tasks 1 and 3, and the long turn is a monologue. Both of these are important skills, but interaction is part of it. It's present in that test. So thinking of our 3 different kinds of speaking that we started with, computer speaking tests can only measure up to monologue. It is impossible by default for a computer test to be tapping into interaction. Face-to-face speaking tests are the only tests that can actually generate interaction. And so if a test has an interactional component, then that's what teachers will be practicing in the classroom as well. Okay, so this was a little bit about testing interactional competence. Let's think about how you develop it. That's possibly the more relevant topic for you. I mean, it's really, there's so many different ideas. I just want to trigger. Just want to start putting some ideas out there, but of course you can come up with even better ideas than me. I think the first really important step when you're focusing on interaction is to make your students aware of the micro skills of interaction. Initiating, responding, developing your topics, other people's topics, listening actively, and so on. Think of when you teach grammar. Do you just throw a grammar book at your students and let them get on with it? No, you break it into chunks. You look at tenses, you look at prepositions, you look at something else. It's exactly the same with interaction. We need to break it down for our students and make them become aware of what those micro skills are. Analyze video clips and transcripts. I did a little bit of that with you today. It's an incredibly good way to raise their awareness of what's going on in interaction. Get them to look at others speak and to analyze what's actually going on, knowing what the skills are. Practice specific micro skills. It's about focused practice. Maybe you're just going to be practicing initiations, or maybe you just practice listening actively and showing comprehension. Maybe you practice inviting your partner. Maybe you practice just responding. But break it down for learners. That's how you learn anything, actually. It's not just language, but anything is learned through focused practice. You can become a master only by focusing on different elements of what you're studying and what you're trying to develop. Give self and peer feedback. Provide feedback on specific interactional skills, not on grammar, not on vocabulary, not on pronunciation, but on how they're managing the interactional micro skills. Are they showing active listenership? Are they developing and extending their partner's topic? Give them feedback on that, because those are the interactional skills. Practice useful language, of course. You know, what is the kind of language that goes with agreeing with something, with describing something, with disagreeing, and so on. And get your students to record themselves and look at themselves interacting. It's not going to be an easy task. I remember when I was learning to be a teacher, one of our assignments was to record ourselves teaching, and then we had to show the video and get critiqued by the whole class. It was painful, it was embarrassing, it was not an easy task, but it was very useful, because you get to see yourself doing a difficult task. So these are really just some suggestions of what you should be doing in the classroom. So here are two examples. Here's a video that you can show them. This actually happens to be from the IELTS test. It doesn't have to be from a test, but I've chosen an example from here, and then you can say, well, what does Takashi do in his responses? So you listen to the video, then get your students to decide what he does. And you give them maybe a checklist. You scaffold this a little bit. Is he giving an opinion, agreeing, disagreeing, describing? What is he doing? Make it easy for them by giving them some options to choose from. And then here's the even better question. What can he do to improve his responses? What would you say that's different? What would you add that makes his response better? So you're introducing the student their own ideas in here as well. Or here's just another idea. You get your students to work in pairs. They choose a topic each, anything they want to talk about. I don't know, Japanese food, Nagoya sites, whatever. They think of 2 questions to ask about each topic. So you're scaffolding. This is still very easy. You're holding their hand. Then they have to ask and answer each other's questions, so they're just responding to a question. And then they have to add one of their ideas to their partner's response. So question, response, they're adding an idea. That's a 3-point turn. Again, you're just starting from basics and you're focusing specifically on interactional skills. Again, calling out something that has been influential. This is by Daniel Lamb, who, again, this is a free resource on the Cambridge website, and he looked at interactional skills and micro skills, and then he looked at videos online, and he said, oh, if you use these 2 minutes from the videos, they illustrate this specific interactional skill, and then he gives a worksheet that could go with that. So really, really useful resource for teachers as well. Okay, so we've talked about interaction, what goes on in the brain, the socio-cognitive aspect of it. We've talked about what it looks like in learner speech. We've talked about how you test it, how you teach it. But actually, the biggest breakthrough for me as I was preparing for this talk was that it's not about interaction, actually. and that schools are not just about knowledge. You don't go to a school to get your head filled with facts. That's not what school should be about. And you are not just teaching interactional skills in your classroom. You're not even just developing language competence, which is the broader concept here. But what you're doing is developing well-rounded, happy students that have agency, that are taught by by teachers who have efficacy. So this really, when you're teaching interaction, this is what you should be thinking about, the much broader concept behind that. So let's think about this a little bit. This is a way to think about the world of your students. Any learner has these three worlds around them. And that's what in the previous talk was referred to in the UNESCO document, but with different names actually. So there's the cognitive world. That's the knowledge that is being acquired. But that's not the only thing that schools do. There is, of course, also the social world. Knowledge is not acquired in a vacuum. You don't sit in a room with textbooks or with a computer learning. That's not what learning is about. All the theories of learning that people respect these days talk about the social aspect of learning. Learning is a mutual endeavor. Vygotsky, who was a social psychologist from the a long time ago, his theory, which is theory of sociocultural theory, is fundamentally embedded in the social aspect of learning. So learning is developed through social interaction. And also there's an emotional world. All of you students bring themselves into the classroom. They can't just leave their interests, their emotions, their likes and dislikes outside. That all becomes part of the world that they bring that you have to work with. And these three worlds can't be separated. They can't be fragmented. Typically, schools just focus on the cognitive aspect of it. They need to be focusing on all of these three aspects of learning. Colleen McLaughlin, a professor at Cambridge University, said this, that the student is at the center in this model. The human being is important. The emphasis is on relationships, connection, control, and meaning. That's what good learning is about. It's not about learning facts. So let's think a little bit about what that means. Agency is one of those... Sorry, did you want to take...
Yeah, I did.
I'll go back.
Thanks. Sorry.
So let's think a little bit about what that means. So what are those additional skills apart from language and grammar and vocabulary interaction and so on? Well, agency, we've heard agency many, many times already in this conference. It's the power to believe that you can make a difference, that you can change the path of your learning or someone else's. Agency is incredibly important. If you feel disempowered, then you're not going to be making a lot of progress in learning or in any other field. Self-efficacy, this was a concept that Dave Barker picked up in the first plenary, and I was very pleased that he did. Self-efficacy is the belief that you can achieve your goals. It's the belief that you can achieve difficult goals. It's possibly, self-efficacy is possibly the most important belief anyone can carry. If you have high self-efficacy, now this is your perceived belief, then you're very likely to succeed. So there's a difference between self-efficacy and self-confidence. Self-confidence is, for example, saying, I know I'm good at maths. I know I'm good at history. I know I'm good at English. Self-efficacy is different. Self-efficacy says, the belief, I know that I can achieve a difficult task in maths if I try hard. Or I know I can learn English and a difficult thing in English if I work hard. So it's that belief that you can achieve difficult goals. It's more important than self-confidence. It's the most important belief that you can develop in your students, because that determines how successful they're going to be. Not just in your classroom, in their life. Growth mindset. This is another related idea. And the two key terms here are a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Have you heard those two terms before? Yeah, people are nodding. Now this is about people's belief about what they can learn and about intelligence. If you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can learn anything, even if it's difficult. But through practice, through putting in the relevant work, you can achieve that difficult goal. A fixed mindset, which is the opposite, means that you believe that intelligence or the ability to learn is fixed. And no matter how much you try, you're not going to succeed. So if you have a fixed mindset and you tackle something difficult in English, you're not going to try very hard because you believe that you're not you're not a gifted language learner. So growth mindset is another important skill. So just to go back to my juggling balls that I started with, I've got a very, very strong growth mindset. I couldn't master these things, but I'm not giving up. When I go back to Cambridge, I'm going to keep going because I practice with my son. And we watched the YouTube video. He picked it up very quickly. I didn't, but I believe I can do just as well as him. So I'm not, I don't believe I'm not meant to be juggling, I will, because I've got a growth mindset about life, including juggling. Failure. How you deal with failure is really, really important as well. Do you make a drama out of mistakes as something that shouldn't be allowed, or are mistakes seen as part of the learning process? Critical thinking. Do you engage with issues versus just receiving them as truth? And collaboration. This is a social skill. So these are all skills in addition to language, in addition to interaction, that you really need to be focusing on. And guess what? Interaction, developing interactional skills is at the heart of this. I've been talking about developing cognitive processes to help your learners become better at interacting, but it's not just about that. Interaction is an inherently social activity. It's about mutually creating language and learning and knowledge with others. It also, because you're interacting with human beings, it has an emotional element. So interaction is not just about language, it's about this much, much bigger world behind interactional competence. So these are just some examples. There are many more, I'm sure, that you can think of others, but what you need to give your students to develop these things is choice. It can be very small choice. In this activity, there are 2 topics. You choose which one you want to work on. Or in this activity, there are 2 topics I've given you, and choose which one, or you can bring a 3rd one of your own. Or choose how you want to be given feedback. So give your learners the chance to tell you what they would like to do. Give them the element of choice. Give them autonomy to make decisions. Don't always step in to tell them what's right and what's wrong. Put them in the driving seat. Get them to be making some of those decisions, because that's how you develop the really important skills in life. Opportunities for teamwork. Of course, in the language classroom, this is, I'm not saying anything new. I'm sure that you do a lot of group and pair work. But this is crucially important because peer work, teamwork, develops the social skills, the cognitive skills, and the emotional skills that your students need to be developing. Safe space to make mistakes. Remember, failure and how you treat failure is really, really essential. You need to create a space in your classrooms where you're not correcting every mistake necessarily, you're not making a drama out of it, but it's seen as something that your students are going to go through. You know how many times I dropped these balls as I was practicing? But I felt not being ridiculed by my son, and he created a safe space for me to learn to juggle, and that made a big difference. Time to reflect on strengths. It's really important to build that reflection time, and Don actually talked about it earlier today in the plenary at 2 o'clock. You have to build reflection time, maybe in the classroom, maybe outside of the classroom, but think of what you did, think of what you've learned, and think of what you're good at. What are your strengths? What have you achieved? What do you think you're really proud of that you did? And also, support to set learning goals, because learning is about, here's what I can do, here are my strengths, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here's how I'm going to get there. And you get to that unknown by setting learning goals. It's not easy to set learning goals at all, but if your learners can develop that skill, they're going to be a step ahead of their learning. Okay, I've talked a lot about interaction. Technology, I couldn't not mention technology because technology is widespread, and you shouldn't be forgetting about technology when we're talking about interactional skills. Even though technology is limited, even though you cannot have a conversation well, you cannot have a meaningful, intelligent conversation. I can talk to Siri on my phone, but Siri is very limited in what Siri can tell me. So technology is really still quite limited, but at the same time, it's very widespread. It's part of our lives. Here's another photo of you. Here's my son. What is he holding? iPad, and what's next to him? 2 devices at the same time. This is unfortunately his life. And even the dog now looks at all the electronic stuff that he's holding. He's 14 years old. This is his world. He cannot imagine a world without an iPad because he was born into the world of smart technology. I'm sure a lot of your learners are like him. This is the generation, they call the Generation Z and the Generation Alpha. They are born into this world. And so you need to be thinking how to integrate technology when you work with these kids, or even with adults, because that is part of their life and you cannot avoid it. So this is my son's world, the cognitive, emotional, and social. Technology is very much part of it. His teacher gives him maths homework online. His French teacher, so French is his foreign language, his French teacher tells him to watch videos in French. So a lot of his content is already delivered. School content is in the cognitive world is very much part of the technology, is very much enabled by technology. Social world, very much so. When he comes home from school, what does he do you think? What's the first thing he does? He goes on the Xbox and he starts playing horrible games. But anyway, he starts playing computer games and he talks to his friends. He's not just playing. He's talking to his friends that he talked to 10 minutes ago in school, but they continue the conversation. So socially, he's very much now becoming, social interaction for him happens not just face to face, it happens via technology as well. That's how it is. He doesn't know anything different. It's part of his emotional world. It makes him feel good. Unfortunately, I think he's a bit too addicted to this. And if we take his screens away, if he's naughty, believe me, it is not pretty emotionally. He really doesn't take it easily. But what I'm illustrating is, for this generation, and definitely for the younger generation, technology is part of their lives. You need to be, as you're teaching interaction or language or anything else, you need to be thinking how to incorporate technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow in my second talk. I don't know what time it is, but sometime tomorrow. Okay, so this is really ending. I just want to summarize what we've talked about. So remember, we talked about the socio-political reasons why we should be considering interaction, the cognitive and the personal growth. Well, just summarizing, interaction competence is a key skill. It's not just something that would develop. It's not something that is unimportant. It's a key skill. How do you practice it? You need awareness of what it is. It's not just this thing called talking, but what is it? So you need awareness, you need practice, and you need reflection on where you are with development in interaction. And really the biggest question, the most important one, is why should you even bother with developing it? Because it's not just about interactional skills in the language, it's not even just about language, but it's about growth as a learner. It's about opportunity. And that's what communication gives you, and the ability to use a language and communicate in it. And remember, I started with the photo of me at the beginning when I was 7 years old learning English, and this book that was very limited at the time. Well, here I am now giving a presentation from, have come all the way from Cambridge to talk to you because of English. English truly changed my life, and that's what it has done for a lot of you, I'm sure. Those who have learned English or those who have learned other languages, and it's an incredibly important communication interaction is a driver in that. And on this note, I shall say, oh my goodness, my Japanese has escaped me. Stephen, help me. Oh, arigato gozaimashita. I practice. Arigato gozaimashita.